Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely a shift in gears for us.
Right, because usually we're looking at, modern tech or current politics, maybe the latest health craze. But today we are traveling back in time. And I mean like way back.
We are talking thousands of years back.
Exactly. We are stepping right into the scorching heat of the Sinai Desert, right into the middle of the ancient Israelite community.
Mm.
And the vibe there, it is tense. It is really hostile because we are basically walking into a crime scene.
Yeah, a murder mystery, to be precise.
Right, a total murder mystery.
It really is, it's like the original locked room mystery setup, isn't it? Or, I guess, locked tent mystery.
Totally, a locked tent mystery.
Okay.
So set the scene for us. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so you have the 12 tribes of Israel. They are camping out in the wilderness. It is dusty, resources are super tight, and tempers are already flaring.
Yeah, they've been wandering, right?
Exactly. And then a body is found. A prominent man from the community murdered, just lying there in the sand.
And nobody knows who did it.
Nobody. That is the key here. There are no witnesses. There is no murder weapon left behind.
Right.
And, in a deeply tribal society like that, an unsolved murder isn't just a personal tragedy. It is a spark in a powder keg.
Because everyone starts pointing fingers.
Accusations start flying instantly. One tribe says, your guy did it, and the other tribe yells back, no, you're just trying to frame us to take our land.
It's on the verge of a total civil war.
The complete bloodbath. Everyone is at each other's throats.
So they need a solution. And they need it like yesterday.
Right. Now, most people who grew up with the Bible or the Quran, they know this story. It's the very famous story of the cow.
Al-Baqarah in Arabic.
Yes, Surah Al-Baqarah. And if you ask your average Sunday school teacher or imam how this ancient mystery gets solved, they usually tell you what amounts to a ghost story.
A magic trick, basically.
That is the traditional narrative, yes.
Yeah.
The story usually goes that the people were panicking, so they went to Moses and said, ask God for a solution.
Right. We need divine intervention here.
And God commands them to find a very specific cow. It has to be yellow, unyoked, in perfect physical condition, and they have to slaughter it.
Which, okay, up to that point, that sounds like a fairly standard ancient ritual. Animal sacrifice was everywhere.
It was. But then comes the twist. The traditional interpretation of the text says they take a piece of that dead, slaughtered cow.
Like a leg or something.
Maybe leg, maybe the tail. The old commentaries kind of vary on that detail.
Mm-hmm.
But they take this piece of dead meat and they strike the corpse of the murder victim with it.
They physically whack the dead body with a piece of steak.
Essentially, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, according to this traditional version, the dead man miraculously jolts back to life.
Wow.
Just long enough to sit up, point a dramatic finger at a guy in the crowd, and scream, "He killed me!"
And then
He just drops dead again.
It is literally the Walking Dead Sinai edition.
It really is. It's a zombie witness testimony.
And look, for centuries, people have just accepted that, right? They think, well, it's a miracle, God can do anything, so he made a zombie.
Right. The supernatural is just baked into how people read these texts.
But today, and this is why we're doing this deep dive, today we are looking at this famous story through a completely different lens. We are diving into the work of a scholar named Allama G.A Parwez.
Yes.
And Parwez looks at this whole zombie story and basically says, guys, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense.
Parwez is, how do I put this? He is a disruptor.
Big time.
He is a fiercely rationalist scholar.
Mm-hmm.
His entire philosophy is based on the idea that the Quran is not a book of magic spells.
Right.
It is a book of reason, meant for people who actually think. And he anchors his entire counter-argument on the very last few words of this specific story in the text itself.
Which are what? What does the text actually say?
The Quran wraps up this whole crazy cow incident with the Arabic phrase, la'alakum takilun.
Okay, my Arabic is a bit rusty. Break that down for us.
It translates roughly to, so that you may use your intellect, or so that you may reason.
So that you may use your reason.
Parwez grabs onto that specific phrase, and he does not let go. He says, look, a miracle in the traditional sense of a magical event that breaks the laws of physics, like a zombie sitting up, that by definition renders human intellect completely helpless.
Explain that a bit more. How does it make intellect helpless?
Well, think about it. If you see a piece of dead cow bring a dead man back to life, can you analyze that scientifically?
No.
Can you use logic to explain the biological mechanism of that?
Of course not. You just stand there with your jaw on the floor and say, wow, magic.
Exactly. Your intellect stops working, you are forced to abandon reason, and just blindly accept the supernatural.
Oh, I see.
So Parwez argues if the Quran explicitly says the overarching purpose of this event is so that you may use your intellect, then the event itself cannot be something that actively defies intellect.
That makes a lot of sense. It can't be magic if the whole point is to teach you how to think.
Right. It has to be something rational, something analytical.
That is such a fascinating flip. He is using the text itself to critique the traditional magical interpretation of the text.
He really is. So the mission for our deep dive today is to see if he can actually pull this off.
Yeah, because taking the magic out of a famous miracle story is a tall order.
It is. We're going to explore Parwez's rationalist interpretation. We're going to see how he takes this story from a supernatural legend about a zombie witness and turns it into what he calls a masterclass in forensic psychology, ancient law, and sociology.
I love it. We are basically turning Moses from a desert wizard into a hard-boiled detective.
A detective, a brilliant psychologist, and a revolutionary leader all rolled into one.
Let's get right into the stack of sources we have for this. We were pulling primarily from Parwez's lectures, right?
Yes, specifically we're looking at excerpts from his work titled Reason and Revelation and a really detailed series called Qisas and the Life of a Just Society.
And we also have a specific linguistic breakdown of verses 72 through 82 of Surah Al-Baqarah.
Exactly. The notes on the rationalist Quran.
Okay, let's unpack this step by step. We have a murder, we have a confused, angry community, and we have a cow.
Yes.
If Parwez is saying the cow part didn't magically bring the dead guy back to life, he needs a pretty strong alternative explanation. Because the text literally does say, strike him with part of it.
He does. But before he gives his actual solution, Parwez first dismantles the zombie theory using some pure cold logic. He asks these questions that are actually kind of funny if you really stop to think about them.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, he asks, if a piece of a dead cow has the chemical or biological property to bring a human back to life, is that a universal law of nature?
Like, if we go out to a steakhouse tonight and I slap a raw ribeye onto a corpse in the county morgue, will it wake up?
Exactly. Only if it's medium rare, maybe. But no, obviously not.
Right, it doesn't work that way.
So it is clearly not an inherent property of the cow itself. So then the traditionalists will say, no, it was a specific one-time miracle just for that moment.
Just a special dispensation.
But Parwez asks, does God keep a secret stash of magic cow parts for the Day of Judgment? And more importantly, and this is a real logical hurdle, if it's just God's will to raise the dead, why use the ritual at all?
That's a valid point. If you are God, you don't need props.
Right. Why bother making them search for a yellow cow, slaughter it, and strike the body? Why not just say the word rise and be done with it?
The ritual implies a process. It implies steps that had to be taken for a specific reason.
Exactly. A tangible human process. And Parwez suggests we need to completely stop looking at this as a magical spell and start looking at it as a criminal investigation procedure.
A criminal investigation, ancient CSI, Sinai.
Very much so. But to understand how this ancient procedure actually worked, you have to understand the suspects. You have to really get into the headspace of an ancient Israelite living in the desert 3,000 years ago.
Okay, put me in the desert. What am I thinking? What's my worldview?
You are likely entirely illiterate. You're deeply, deeply tribal. Your whole identity is tied to your clan. And crucially, for this story, you are incredibly superstitious.
Oh, okay.
Parwez points out that these people had what we might call severe necrophobia.
Necrophobia, so an intense fear of the dead.
A fear of the dead, but massively amplified by their culture. They didn't just think a dead body was gross or unsanitary. They believed it was actively dangerous.
Like spiritually dangerous.
Yes. They believed in restless spirits, in ancient curses. They fundamentally believed that the soul of a murdered man was lingering around the body, angry, vengeful, and looking for payback.
So just standing near the corpse wasn't just unpleasant, it was genuinely terrifying for them.
It was a profound source of dread. Now, you have to keep that intense cultural fear in mind, because Parwez argues that the procedure mentioned in the Quran, where suspects were brought in to make contact with the body, was actually an elaborate psychological trap.
Yeah, so the striking mention in the text wasn't to wake the dead guy up.
No. Parwez translates that linguistic interaction differently. The command was actually for the living suspects to be brought into direct contact with the dead victim.
Oh, I see where this is going. It's a lineup.
Imagine the scene. Moses calls all the tribal leaders and all the potential suspects together. He says, we don't know who committed this murder, but the spirit of the victim knows.
He's playing on their superstitions.
Exactly. He orders every single suspect to walk up and touch the corpse. Now, put yourself in that lineup. Imagine you are totally innocent.
Okay.
You walk up, you have to touch the dead body. You were scared, sure, because it's a dead body, you have necrophobia.
Yeah.
But deep down, you know you didn't kill him.
Right. I'm grossed out, maybe a little creeped out by the curse idea, but my conscience is clear. I'm not guilty.
Exactly. But now imagine you are the actual murderer in that same lineup.
Oh, man.
You know for a fact you killed him. And you believe deep in your superstitious ancient bones that if you touch him, his vengeful spirit is going to literally grab you from beyond the grave, or that a divine curse will strike you down by lightning the second your skin touches his.
I am absolutely freaking out. My brain is just screaming, do not touch him.
You are undergoing a massive, uncontrollable nervous system breakdown. Parwez explicitly compares this ancient tactic to a modern invention. He basically calls it the Quranic precursor to the polygraph test.
The lie detector test. Okay, hold on a second. You are telling me a 7th century religious text is describing a polygraph? That sounds a little bit like we're projecting modern technology onto ancient history. Is Parwez reaching here?
It sounds like a reach at first, until you look at how a polygraph machine actually works. A polygraph doesn't read your mind. It is not magic.
Right. It measures physiological stress responses.
Exactly. It looks for involuntary bodily reactions that happen when you are absolutely terrified of getting caught in a lie.
Heart rate spikes, galvanic skin response, changes in breathing patterns.
Yes. Parwez says Moses didn't have a machine, so he used the suspect's own body as the machine. He lists the exact symptoms that would visually appear in the guilty man as he was forced toward the corpse. He uses a really specific, evocative cultural reference here. He talks about the frontier male.
The frontier male, what is that?
In British India and early Pakistan, the frontier male was this legendary, massive, thundering express train. It was famous for being incredibly fast, loud, and powerful. Parwez writes that as the guilty person approached the body, his pulse would be racing like the frontier male.
I love that imagery. Your heart is beating like a runaway train.
And he mentions all the other physiological signs. Profuse sweating, trembling limbs, knees buckling, and specifically the blood completely draining from the murderer's face so he turns chalk pale.
So while all the innocent guys are just nervous and sweaty, the actual killer is hyperventilating, visibly shaking, maybe even fainting before he even touches the guy.
Yes. Parwez's point is that the physical interaction mentioned in the text wasn't a magic spell to raise the dead. It was the high-stakes psychological pressure tactic. It was designed to force a sudden confession or to definitively reveal the culprit through his own uncontrollable body language.
So when the traditional story says the dead man spoke and named his killer,
Parwez would say the situation spoke. The killer's own body spoke. The dead case, the unsolved mystery was brought to life. The truth was dead and buried, and this intense psychological procedure resurrected the truth, bringing it into the light of day.
that makes a ton of sense. It actually reminds me of that old medieval European concept, the trial by ordeal, where they would make a murder suspect touch a corpse to see if the wound started bleeding afresh.
Yes, very similar psychological mechanism.
It sounds like Moses was leveraging that exact same human flaw, the deep-seated belief that the dead can identify the killer to provoke a measurable reaction.
Exactly. Moses wasn't doing magic. He was being a brilliant psychologist.
Yeah.
He deeply knew his people. He knew their deepest fears. And he strategically used those exact fears to serve the cause of justice.
Okay, I am fully buying the detective angle. It is clever, it fits human nature perfectly, but we still have a pretty glaring issue in the text that we haven't solved yet.
The cow.
The cow. If this is just an ancient police lineup, why the elaborate barbecue? Why did they have to find and slaughter a specific yellow cow first? Why not just use a sheep? Or why not just make them touch the body without any animal sacrifice at all?
This is where Parwez shifts gears. He goes from being a detective analyzing a crime scene to being a historian and a theologian analyzing a culture. And this part is absolutely crucial. You literally cannot understand the story without understanding where these Israelites had just come from.
They had just come out of Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea.
They came from generations upon generations of brutal slavery in Egypt. And what was the dominant religious culture in Egypt during that era?
They had a huge pantheon of gods, Ra, Anubis, Osiris.
And very, very prominently, they worshipped the bull on the cow. The Apis bull was a major Egyptian deity, considered an earthly incarnation of the god Ptah. The cow was heavily associated with the goddess Hathor. These animals were profoundly sacred.
Right.
They weren't just farm animals. They were walked through the city streets in massive royal processions, draped in solid gold jewelry and silk.
So for hundreds of years, these enslaved Israelites watched their incredibly powerful masters worship these specific animals.
Not just watched. Parwez argues they fully internalized it. When you are a subjugated people, a slave class, you often subconsciously begin to admire the sheer power of the master class.
You want to be like them.
You start to think, well, maybe their gods really are the true gods. Look at how rich and powerful Egypt is. Look at their pyramids. And look at how weak and poor we are.
It's basically cultural Stockholm syndrome, but applied to religion.
Precisely. And we actually have hard proof of this in the text itself. Think about it. As soon as Moses went up Mount Sinai for just a few days to get the law, what did the Israelites immediately do down in the camp?
They melted down their jewelry and made the golden calf.
Boom. Golden calf. That was not some random artistic choice they just came up with on the fly. They reverted back to what they deeply knew. They reverted to the Egyptian idol of power. The Quran uses a terrifyingly poetic phrase to describe this psychological state. It says, they drank the calf into their hearts.
Drank the calf into their hearts. That implies it wasn't just a statue they liked. It was in their bloodstream. It was a fundamental part of their identity.
It was an all-consuming obsession. So Parwez argues that the divine command to slaughter a cow, it wasn't just a random prerequisite for this murder investigation. It was a targeted psychological deprogramming tool.
Deprogramming, like getting someone out of a cult.
Think about the monumental task Moses has. He is trying to build a brand new nation of strict monotheists, people who believe in one unseen, abstract God of pure justice. But these people he's leading are secretly, or in some cases, openly still deeply in love with the Egyptian cow god.
So they are divided in their loyalties.
Completely. So God commands them through Moses. Take the very object of your hidden reverence. Take this holy, untouchable animal and slaughter it with your own two hands.
Man, that is heavy. That is like, imagine taking a group of modern people who absolutely worship money and status, and you force them to physically burn a massive pile of $100 bills.
It is exactly like that. Or taking someone who is hopelessly addicted to social media validation and forcing them to physically smash their own smartphone with a hammer.
Yeah.
It is a traumatic, physical, irreversible breaking of the psychological attachment. You are forcing them to prove to their own subconscious minds, this thing I secretly worship, it is just a dumb animal, it bleeds, it dies, it has absolutely no divine power whatsoever.
It is shock therapy, pure theological shock therapy.
Exactly. And this leads to what I personally think is Parwez's absolute knockout argument against the traditional miracle story. This is the part of his thesis that made me literally stop reading and go, whoa, he's right.
All right, lay it on me. Let's hear the knockout punch.
Okay, follow the internal logic here very closely. If the traditional magical story is true, that they killed the cow, took a piece of its dead meat, hit a human corpse with it, and that corpse magically came back to life, what is the actual takeaway lesson for the Israelites standing there watching this?
I guess that God is really powerful. He can raise the dead.
No. Look closer at the mechanics of the event. What physical object actually performed the miracle?
The piece of the cow, the meat.
The dead cow meat gave life. Now, if you are an Israelite standing in that crowd who secretly still believes deep down that the cow is a supreme god, and you just watched a piece of a dead cow bring a human back to life, what are you going to conclude?
Oh my God, you're going to think, see, we were totally right all along. The cow, Ayahs divine, even its dead meat has the ultimate power over life and death.
Exactly. The miracle, as traditionally told, would have completely validated their idolatry. It would have empirically proven to them that the cow possesses divine life-giving attributes.
Wow, I never ever thought about it that way.
It would be an absolute theological disaster.
Right.
It would massively reinforce the very shirk, the polytheism, that Moses was desperately trying to destroy in them.
It completely backfires.
Yes. So Parwez argues that for the overarching message of monotheism to work, the cow must have zero magical power. It must just be mundane dead meat. It must be slaughtered and eaten and digested and gone.
So if you accept the traditional miracle story, you are basically saying God intentionally performed a miracle that accidentally encouraged the very idol worship he was trying to forbid.
Which is an enormous theological contradiction. Therefore, Parwez concludes, the rational interpretation isn't just a fun, science-y way to look at the text. It is logically the only interpretation that actually supports the strict monotheism the Quran is trying to teach.
That is a genuinely fantastic point. It is a brilliant logical paradox. If the cow actually does the miracle, the cow wins the theological battle. If the cow is just a mundane prop used to set up the psychological polygraph test, then God and human reason wins.
Precisely. Parwez is saying you absolutely cannot separate a text from its sociological and historical context. You have to look at what the text is actually trying to achieve, which is the liberation of the human mind from superstition and slavery.
Okay, I am with you on this. The detective story angle works brilliantly. The anti-idolatry shock therapy angle works. But, and I have to play the skeptic here just a bit longer. We still have the actual text to deal with, the literal words written on the page.
Yes, the linguistic barrier. Let's get into it.
Right. Because the Quran specifically uses the Arabic word yuhi, which translates to give life. And it uses the word mauta, which translates to dead. The verse literally says, thus Allah brings the dead to life. If Parwez is sitting here saying no one actually biologically came back to life, isn't he just completely twisting the dictionary definition of the words to fit his theory?
That is the most common critique of his work. But this is where Parwez pulls out his dictionary. Specifically, he relies heavily on the Mufradat of Imam Rahib.
What's that?
It is essentially the Oxford English Dictionary for classical Quranic Arabic. It is the gold standard for root word meanings. Parwez is a massive linguistics nerd, and he argues that for centuries, we have been reading these specific words like they are terms in a clinical biology textbook, when we really should be reading them like high literature.
Metaphors. You're talking about linguistic metaphors.
Exactly, in classical Arabic, and honestly, if you think about it, in English too, life and death are constantly used as broad metaphors, not just biological state.
Give me some concrete examples of that. Prove it to me.
Okay. Parwez points to dozens of other verses to build his case. For example, the Quran frequently talks about land that is dead, meaning it's dried up, barren, undergoing a drought, and then it describes how rainfall gives it life. Yuhia.
Okay.
It also talks about people who are walking around biologically alive, but they are dead in their ignorance, and it says the divine guidance gives them life.
Okay, that is fair. I mean, we do use that exact same framing in English all the time. We say, the party is dead, or my phone battery died, or, oh, wait, this is a dead case.
A dead case, yes. There you go. That is the exact metaphor Parwez uses for this story. Imagine a police cold case file. It has been sitting in a cardboard box for 10 years, just gathering dust. The truth is completely buried, the community has moved on, or they're just living in fear. The case is dead.
And if a detective suddenly finds a brand new lead?
You say they breathed new life into the investigation. You bring the hidden truth out into the light. Parwez argues that the life mentioned in this specific verse is the revelation of the truth. The hidden unsolved crime was the dead thing, and the intense psychological investigation brought it to life.
So the resurrection happening here isn't a biological resurrection of a corpse. It is an informational resurrection. The truth comes out.
That is layer number one of his linguistic argument. But there is a second, much deeper layer to his interpretation of life here. And this directly connects to the Islamic legal concept of qisas.
Qisas. That is the law of equal retribution, right? The whole an eye for an eye, a life for a life concept.
Yes, the principle of equitable justice. Now, there is a very famous foundational verse in the Quran that Parwez directly links back to this cow story. It says, "And there is life for you in qisas, O people of understanding."
There is life in retribution. That sounds like a massive oxymoron. Executing a convicted murderer is dealing out death, not life. How does that make sense?
Parwez says you have to zoom out to understand it. You have to stop looking at the individual biological person and start looking at the society as a whole. Parwez views human society as a collective living organism.
Like the concept of the body politic.
Exactly like that. Now, think about what happens to a living society when a brutal murder goes unsolved. Or worse, when a rich or powerful tribe can just kill someone from a weaker tribe and completely get away with it without any consequences.
Well, people get terrified. They stop trusting the legal system. They probably start carrying weapons everywhere. You get generational blood feuds. You get vigilante justice in the streets.
Pure chaos. Lawlessness. The society essentially starts to rot from the inside out. It begins to socially and morally die.
Right.
Parwez argues that when the law of qisas is strictly and fairly applied, when the killer is successfully caught, tried, and punished, you are surgically cutting out the cancer. You're saving the rest of the body politic.
So the execution or punishment of the guilty criminal is literally the life of the surrounding community?
Yes. By finding this killer, using Moses' brilliant psychological method and exacting proper justice. The legal system breathes life back into the terrified community. It ensures their collective survival. It restores safety and order.
That completely changes how you read the end of the story.
Parwez argues with absolute conviction that this is the life the Quran is talking about in the cow story. It is not about one random guy coming back from the dead to chat for 5 seconds. It is about the entire Israelite community being saved from the impending death of civil war and lawlessness.
That is a massive fundamental shift in perspective. You really stop looking at the religious text as a collection of cool magic tricks, and you start seeing it as a very practical manual for building a functional civilization.
And that, right there, is Parwez's entire life project. That is why he calls it the rationalist Quran. He desperately wants to move the reader away from passive wonder, sitting back and saying, wow, God can do magic, and move them toward active, difficult application. How do we use this text to establish justice today?
Now, speaking of application today, Parwez doesn't just keep his analysis safely quarantined in the past with the ancient Israelites. He actually uses this exact story to launch a pretty fierce, controversial attack on his own contemporaries, doesn't he? He turns the analytical lens squarely onto the modern religious establishment.
Oh, yes, he does. This is where the text gets incredibly spicy. Parwez was, well, he was not very popular with the traditional clergy of his time. The mullahs and the religious scholars often hated him, and this specific section of his commentary really explains why. He looks closely at verses 78 and 79, which appear right smack in the middle of this cow narrative.
What do those verses say?
They talk about a group of people who write the book with their own hands and then sell it for a paltry price.
Ah, the business of religion.
Exactly. He actually calls this phenomenon gupt vidya.
Gupt vidya, that sounds like a Sanskrit phrase.
It is Sanskrit. It translates to secret knowledge or hidden wisdom. Parwez argues that organized religious hierarchies across history, whether you were talking about the ancient Jewish rabbis in this story, the medieval Christian church, or the modern Muslim ulama, they all ultimately rely on the exact same psychological trick to maintain power. They create an artificial monopoly on truth.
How exactly do they manage to do that? How do you monopolize a book that anyone can just buy?
Well, historically, the first step is language. You keep the masses largely unlettered or illiterate. But Parwez points out that even in modern times, when people can read perfectly fine, the clergy still makes the scripture functionally inaccessible by treating it like a dead language.
Oh, I see this all the time. You have people who can read the Quran in Arabic beautifully with perfect pronunciation and rhythm, but if you ask them what the sentence means, they have absolutely zero idea.
Exactly. It becomes an incantation. You see the same thing with reciting Latin Catholic masses for centuries or chanting Sanskrit mantras. The words lose their meaning and just become sounds. Parwez argues that the entrenched clergy actually wants this situation.
Why? Why wouldn't they want people to understand the book?
Because they want the common person to merely chant the book for blessings, for what they call thawab, rather than deeply understanding the legal and moral code within it.
Right, because if I actually understand the legal contract myself, I don't need to hire the lawyer to explain it to me.
Exactly. You nailed it. If you can read and understand the law of God yourself using your own intellect, you completely cut out the middleman. And the middleman really, really doesn't like that. The middleman loses his authority.
And he loses his paycheck.
Parwez is brutal about the financial aspect of this. When the Quran talks about writing the book with their own hands, Parwez interprets that not just as physically altering the ancient scrolls, but as the modern practice of writing fatwas, religious legal opinions, and loudly claiming this is the definitive will of God.
When in reality...
When really it is just their own personal flawed opinion, and usually an opinion carefully designed to please a corrupt king or a wealthy patron, or just to keep the uneducated masses docile and under control.
So the verse saying they sell it for a paltry price means they are literally selling their scholarly integrity and the truth in exchange for worldly status and money.
Yes. They trade the eternal truth for temporary power. But Parwez argues that the biggest, most profitable product they sell, the absolute blockbuster bestseller in the business of religion, is the doctrine of intercession, what is called shafat.
Okay, let's really dig into intercession, because this is a huge, huge concept in almost every major religion. This is basically the idea that even if I am a terrible sinner, even if I break all the rules, someone holy like a prophet or a saint or a martyr will stand up for me on Judgment Day, vouch for me, and get me into heaven anyway.
It is the ultimate spiritual get-out-of-jail-free card.
And honestly, looking at human nature, Who doesn't want that? It is incredibly comforting. If I'm going to spiritual court, I want the best lawyer in the universe defending me.
Of course, it's comforting.
Yeah.
That is exactly why it sells so well. But Parwez looks at this doctrine and argues that it is perhaps the single most destructive, poisonous idea in the entire history of human religion. He sees it as the absolute root cause of all societal and moral decline.
That is a massive claim. Why does he think it's so destructive?
Because it completely, utterly destroys personal accountability. Parwez reconstructs the mindset of someone who believes in intercession. He says they think, I can cheat my customers in my business. I can take and pay bribes. I can ruthlessly oppress the poor. I can do whatever I want. And sure, I might have to go to hell for a few days to burn off the sins. But my connections, my prophet, my chosen saint, they will eventually intervene. They will pull strings and get me out.
It's spiritual nepotism.
Right.
It is literally taking the concept of the absolute, perfectly just court of God and degrading it into a corrupt, earthly, third-world court system where it's not what you do, it's who you know.
Exactly. That is exactly how Parwez frames it. He argues vehemently that the Quran, properly understood, establishes a very strict, unbreakable law of requital. Basic cause and effect.
Action and reaction.
Yes, you put your hand into a roaring fire, you are going to get burned. It absolutely does not matter who your father is. It does not matter what holy saint you pray to every night. The fire burns everyone equally. The law is the law.
So he says there is no intercession at all, period. Just strict adherence to the law.
He asks a very provocative logical question based on the text. The Prophet Muhammad himself is explicitly told in the Quran to declare, I fear the punishment of my Lord if I disobey.
Okay.
Now Parwez asks, if the Prophet himself, who Muslims consider the most perfect human being to ever live, if he personally fears the consequences of breaking the law, how on earth can he supposedly save you if you choose to disobey it?
Right. If the CEO of the company has to strictly follow the HR rules, the summer intern definitely doesn't get a free pass to break them.
Exactly. Parwez paints this incredibly vivid picture of the clergy intentionally inventing and heavily promoting this doctrine of intercession purely to keep people dependent on them. The message is basically, you are miserable sinners, you are weak, you cannot possibly save yourselves. But if you stick closely with us, pay your religious tithe, kiss our hands, and follow our rituals, we will make sure to put in a good word for you with the big boss.
It all connects perfectly back to the zombie miracle idea, doesn't it? If religion is just magic dead cows, magic intercession spells, then you really don't need to do the hard work of being a good, ethical person. You just need to find the right magic spell or the right magical friend to save you.
Precisely. That is the core of his thesis. But if religion is fundamentally based on reason and law, as Parwez fiercely argues, then there are no magical shortcuts. None. You have to actually do the hard work. You have to actively build the just society. You have to be deeply, fundamentally ethical in your daily dealings.
And honestly, that is a terrifying prospect to a lot of people. Taking absolute, total responsibility for your own actions without a safety net is scary.
It is terrifying. Which brings us perfectly to the emotional climax of this entire Quranic passage. Parwez moves on to discuss the concept of hardened hearts.
Right, the text says something about their hearts turning to stone.
Yes, the verse explicitly says that even after seeing all these signs of the investigation, the deprogramming the people's hearts eventually became hard as stones, or even harder.
Harder than stone? That is bleak.
It is a beautiful, if incredibly tragic, piece of literary analysis by Parwez. He looks closely at that metaphor and says, look at nature, look at the physical world. Even a literal stone, a dead, cold, inanimate object, has some degree of give to it.
How so? What does a stone give?
Stones can physically split open, and life-giving water flows out of them. We see springs and rivers bursting from solid rock. Stones can also break off and fall down from mountains. The Quran poetically phrases this as stones falling out of the fear of God.
Which Parwez probably interprets as gravity.
Exactly. Parwez interprets that poetic phrase as the stone submitting perfectly to natural physical laws.
Yeah.
Gravity pulls and the stone obeys and falls. It yields to a higher law.
So even a dumb rock follows the rules of the universe and can provide life-giving water to people.
But a human heart. Parwez argues that when a human heart becomes completely hardened by greed, by the constant exploitation of others, and by mindless, empty religious ritualism, it becomes drier and harder than a literal stone. It becomes completely impermeable to empathy.
And Parwez links this concept of the hardened heart specifically to economics, doesn't he? It's not just about being mean, it's about money.
He does. He writes very powerfully about what he calls the dry eye.
The dry eye.
He specifically associates this with the eye of the usurer, the extreme capitalist who extracts wealth from the vulnerable without producing anything of actual value for society.
Mhm.
He says that the eye of the usurer has absolutely no moisture in it. It has no tears. It is incapable of feeling compassion for the profound suffering of the rest of humanity.
That is a searing, devastating image. He is basically talking about the incredibly pious religious man, the guy who prays perfectly in the front row 5 times a day, wears all the right traditional clothes, has the big beard. But he feels absolutely nothing when he aggressively evicts a poor family from their home or when he systematically underpays his factory workers.
Yes. Parwez would say that specific man has a heart far harder than any stone. The stone might eventually yield water to a thirsty traveler, but that religious man will yield absolutely nothing but cruelty and exploitation. And Parwez warns that this specific type of hardness comes directly from abandoning human reason and systemic justice in favor of comforting superstition and the business of religion.
So, bringing this all together and dragging it into our modern context, because Parwez is very clearly always looking at his present day, why does his unique interpretation of an ancient, dusty cow story matter to us right now? Why should a guy commuting to work in 2026 care about a slaughtered yellow cow from 3 millennia ago?
Parwez's ultimate warning to his readers is remarkably simple. Do not for a second think this story is just a history lesson about ancient Jews. He says the exact same psychological disease has deeply infected the modern world, and specifically the modern Muslim community.
The disease of preferring superstition over intellect.
Yes, he talks extensively about falling into the trap of amani.
Amani. What is the translation for that?
It broadly translates to wishful thinking or baseless desires. It is the deeply held, lazy belief that you can just float through life on a comfortable cloud of pious wishes without ever having to take any difficult, constructive action.
Oh, it's the theological equivalent of thoughts and prayers.
It is exactly thoughts and prayers. Parwez compares it to the person who thinks that just physically tracing their finger over the Arabic lines of the scripture somehow magically generates heavenly points, again, thawab, but they never actually bother to read what the text says or do what the law demands of them.
It's the total gamification of faith, treating religion like a video game where you just grind for points by repeating phrases.
And Parwez bluntly says that any society that operates that way is a dead nation. A nation that relies on accumulating magic points instead of establishing living, breathing laws is already dead, even if the people are still walking around. He argues that the Quran's primary invitation to humanity is to aggressively use intellect, to use equal, true life. And remember our metaphor of Yuhi bringing the dead case to life. True societal life only comes from establishing a firmly just order.
And he talks about the core Islamic concepts of Salah and Zakat very differently in this context, right? Not just as personal rituals, but as massive social systems.
Right. In Parwez's rationalist framework, Salah is not merely the physical act of bowing in prayer. It is the establishment of a comprehensive system that follows the divine code of ethics. And Zakat is not just throwing a few coins to a beggar as charity. It is the implementation of a systemic, robust economic order that structurally ensures no single person in the society is left behind to starve.
So salvation, in his view, isn't about finding the right magic cow to slaughter. It is about actively building the just society.
Exactly. And it is certainly not about who you know on Judgment Day, the whole intercession myth. It is purely about what you actually do here and now. It is about tangible, constructive, corrective deeds. Parwez is looking his listeners directly in the eye and telling them, stop waiting around for a magical miracle to save you. Stop waiting for the Mahdi or the Messiah or the alien overlords to come down from the sky and fix the planet for you.
God already gave you a brain.
Exactly. God gave you an intellect. Use it. Establish justice yourselves. Save yourselves.
Man, that is incredibly empowering, but at the same time, it is deeply, deeply intimidating.
It puts the entire burden of history squarely back onto our own shoulders. We can't blame the devil and we can't wait for a miracle.
It really is a complete, fundamental paradigm shift in how you read religious texts. We have taken a journey today from a seemingly primitive story about a magically resurrected zombie corpse, and we've transformed it into a complex narrative about forensic psychology, about breaking the deep psychological chains of historical slavery, about the absolute necessity of establishing strict social justice, and about aggressively exposing the financial corruption of the clergy.
It completely changes the text from a simple book of ancient history or a book of magic spells into a highly advanced, timeless book of sociology and human law.
And it really begs the question for all of us today. What are the cows that we are currently worshiping? What are the deeply held, unexamined idols that we urgently need to slaughter in order to actually free our own minds?
Maybe our idol is our absolute reliance on new technology to constantly solve our deepest moral and societal problems. Maybe it is our unquestioning worship of limitless wealth and capitalism. Or maybe the modern cow we worship is just the very comforting idea that we can continually act selfishly and get away with things without ever facing the actual consequences.
Parwez clearly suggests that dead nations are simply those nations that ultimately abandon reason and intellect for the comfort of superstition and wishful thinking.
It does raise a very provocative final thought for us to end on. If a modern society operates entirely on connections, on political lobbying, on intercession, on who you know in power, rather than on objective merit and the equal application of the law, is that society effectively already dead, even if its stock market is booming and millions of people are walking around its cities every day?
Are we the actual zombies in this story?
We very well might be. And if Parwez is right, maybe human reason is the only miracle left that can actually bring us back to life.
Wow. There it is. Something major for you to chew on this week. Thank you, as always, for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Keep thinking, everyone.